Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then the disciples told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is the story of a transformation. This is the story of two disciples who walked out on the road and had their lives changed, transformed by the resurrection. Imagine the joy that they felt at telling Jesus, who they didn't know, all of these terrible things that had happened, all of this confusion and wondering, and then hearing that, no, this is exactly how it had to happen. And having their eyes open to see Jesus is here, he is alive, it is all true. It's a joy-filled experience. And when I look at this story, what I see is that they were able to have this experience, first and foremost because Jesus gave it to them. But they were able to have this experience because they were open to connection, because they shared their experiences with the person that they met, and they listened to this stranger, and because they were able to recognize Jesus. This is a message from God, essentially. This is a vision from God. This is on par with prophets receiving words from God and visions of angels in the past. Jesus appears on the road after he's died to these disciples. And I thought back to all of the call stories that are in the Bible. And I thought I was going to make this really neat point about how all of the prophets were just like so ready to hear, and we should be ready to hear like the prophets. And then I actually started looking at the stories. And I found the story of Jonah, who says, "I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. Are you kidding? I'm going the opposite direction." And then I found the story of Paul, who said, "I am going to persecute you. I will serve you over my dead body," until God blinded him and gave him sight. There's a story of Jeremiah, who heard the word of God and said, "I am only a child. I could not possibly share this story." There's a story of Moses, right? I can't even talk. Why would you have me speak for you? So it turns out, if you are here in this building today, you are officially more open to God's call than any of the prophets. Because at least you came here willingly. So congratulations on that. Being open, though, I think is so important. Being ready to receive what God wants to lay out before us. What happens when we're open to God? We learn to recognize God in front of us. We learn to see where God is active. We learn to see Jesus walking in our presence. It's interesting, when Jesus appears after his resurrection, there's a big theme in all of the Gospels about how he looks different. We kind of don't know what he looks like. We know a little bit. We know he had holes in his hands and in his side. But something prevents people from recognizing him over and over again. And then he eventually proves that it's him. Often he says, hey, did you see how I have holes in my hands? And people say, oh, yes, now I believe. Okay, that's a pretty good sign that this is Jesus. In other stories, they believe once he helps them catch some fish. So that's interesting. Other stories, people believe when they hear him speak. When Mary runs into Jesus and thinks he's the gardener, he just says, Mary. And she knows that it's him. With these two, they don't know until he starts eating with them, until he breaks the bread and starts to sit down at the table with them. It's always something a little bit different, but there's always something that just clicks with people, and they can recognize, yes, this is actually Jesus, even though I didn't know him. Something that makes Jesus recognizable, and when you become open to it, you see him. When you are open to God, you also begin to see how God is not only present with you now, but has been present with you all along. Right? It's like that footprints poem. You all know the footprints poem? Oh, when I looked back, there were 2 sets of footprints, but the toughest times there's only one. And Jesus says, well, that's because then I was carrying you. This is your annual reminder that that is not in the Bible, but it's still pretty neat. So, what is in the Bible is these disciples walking along the road. This is the footprint story. We were walking along the road, and did we not notice? Was there not something within us that knew this was Jesus all along? He was always with us. When you're open to God, you not only begin to recognize Jesus and see how he's been walking with you all along, but you feel the joy that he offers. And look at what these disciples do with that. They recognize him, he disappears, and they run back to the 11 disciples, because we lost one, right? Where they run back to the 11 apostles, and they say, guess what we heard? And they don't even get a word in edgewise, because the disciples are going, guess what we saw? And everybody's so excited. There's just all of this joy. And something amazing is happening. Something good came out of something bad. And they all wanted to share it with each other. And then they go out and they share it with the world. All of these things are essential. We need to know what Jesus looks like, and we need to be able to recognize him. That is an important part of our journey of faith. These 2 disciples, they recognized Jesus because he did the kinds of things Jesus would do. Jesus would sit down and break bread with you. And somehow they were able to recognize that. In Matthew 25, Jesus gives us another way to recognize him. He starts by telling the disciples, hey, be careful how you use your resources. You should shepherd them, steward them wisely. And then he tells them, you know what? You are not going to recognize me. When you get up to heaven after you die, you're not going to be able to recognize me. And they said, what? How are we not going to be able to recognize you? And so he says, Jesus says, righteous people are going to say to me, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, thirsty or gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? When was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And Jesus says, in the voice of the king of this story, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Jesus tells his disciples, you won't recognize me, but you will find me when you find a hungry person. I will look like a thirsty person. I will look like someone with torn clothes in need of help and a handout. Jesus will look like a foreigner in need of welcome, a prisoner in need of a visit. In other words, Jesus is everywhere, all around us, if we have the eyes to see him in the faces of others. And that's an opportunity and a blessing. Jesus is alive not only in heaven, up there where he ascended, he is alive here, now, in this space, in each other. He is alive in our communities, in our neighborhoods. God is walking alongside us. God is walking alongside us as an impoverished, oppressed, disenfranchised person. God is walking alongside us as a stranger on the road. We are not alone. And crucially, God is most present when we feel the most alone. God is most present when we are that oppressed and disenfranchised person. Jesus tells us, if you want to get to know me, if you want to learn to recognize me, you can begin by living in solidarity with the so-called least of these, who are members of my family. And when we begin to do this, when we begin to learn how to recognize Jesus in the faces of others, recognize Jesus at work in the world, a whole different kind of joy can seep into our lives. Joy that laughs in the face of death. Joy that isn't just about feeling comfortable because, hey, we've made it, we've got the nice house and the two-car garage or whatever it is that's your version of made it. Not just joy about being protected and safe. Joy that knows that no matter what happens, this joy has already won. Joy that isn't the result of being in control or being in power. It's Easter joy. And Easter joy is a resistance, an unwillingness to let evil, death, hatred, and fear win. Easter joy is a joy that has already won because Jesus fought the battle, because Jesus was victorious. This past week was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and so I often like to remember Elie Wiesel when I think of Holocaust Remembrance Day, because he was such an amazing speaker and thinker. In one of his memories of the Holocaust, he watched a fellow prisoner trade his daily ration of bread for some simple materials to piece together a makeshift menorah. And he wrote that he couldn't believe the sacrifices that this prisoner was making, giving up food, much needed food, in order to get a menorah, a religious artifact, a thing you needed to do a ritual, to observe the holidays. And Elie Wiesel asked him, Hanukkah in Auschwitz? And the man replied, especially in Auschwitz. Joy is victorious even in Auschwitz. World War I was a world-changing, potentially world-ending war. The war to end all wars, right? Soldiers on both sides, though, found opportunities to resist the dehumanization of war, the demonization of others, the violence that took their lives. And so we have famous stories of soldiers making a truce on Christmas Day to play soccer in between the trenches. And there's this beautiful story of German soldiers taking spent tank cartridges and placing them on the sides of the trenches, just getting them in the wall and filling them with dirt and planting snowdrops and sending home for more flowers. It's little acts like this, in the face of violence, in the face of war itself, that show us that joy cannot be defeated. In fact, death can be defeated as easily as planting a snowdrop. It is death that is weak. It is evil that is weak. It is not joy. Today, we can use this same Easter joy to resist war and genocide and violence and evil and suffering of all kinds. This is the message of Easter, that joy is alive, that it is resistance against every evil, that it is victory over death, that it is offered to us by a risen Christ who chooses to walk alongside us, who asks us to walk the road alongside him. The disciples in this story did not know where the road was leading them. We have to remember, we know how the story ended. They still didn't. They didn't know where this was going. Especially before they met Jesus. Where were they really going? What were they going to Emmaus for? What came next for them? They didn't know. We don't know. They were walking with a stranger then. They were open to learning about Jesus, and their hearts started burning inside of them. And we will learn more about what happens next, but on the road to Emmaus, nothing was set in stone. The future could have been frightening or dangerous. It could have been filled with grief. But Jesus opened up the possibility that even in the midst of those things, it would also be filled with joy. So what I would like to do is I would like to invite you to walk along this road and to make some kind of commitment within your own heart about how you would like to walk along this road of possibility, of faith, of openness, of recognition, of joy, with however Jesus is calling you to do that. After worship, over in the gathering space, which I would always invite you to the gathering space because there's generally pretty fun food out there and great fellowship, there's a little art project. It's a canvas on which there is a little vista, a sunset with people walking, and a road. And the road is blank, and there are ribbons on that table, and I would invite you to take one of those ribbons and use the little glue dots or tape that's there and put it on the road. And I want that to be your way of making a commitment to walk along this road of faith with Jesus, whatever it looks like and whatever unknown you are facing. There is a poet, Antonio Machado, who said, who wrote this poem. This is a translation of his poem. "Wanderer, your footsteps are the road and nothing more. Wanderer, there is no road. The road is made by walking." That's what we're going to do. We're going to make the road of what comes next in May and June and July and August by walking it together. And we're going to make this road together as well, this little project that reminds us that we're called to walk alongside Jesus on it. The pastor and theologian Brian McLaren says, "You are not finished yet. You are in the making." He says, "Faith is not a destination. It is a way out of old and destructive patterns into new and creative ones, always extended into the future." So in the season ahead, we are invited to walk the road with Jesus. As we listen to the music for reflection, I'd like you to think about two things. One, I'd like you to think about how you want to walk with intention on this road called faith, developing, growing your spirituality. How do you want to walk on this road of faith? And then what will you do to learn to recognize Jesus more easily on the road? How do you want to walk? And how will you learn to recognize Jesus? And after worship, you'll have the opportunity then to go and place a ribbon on that canvas to help us pave together this road that we're going to walk. May we grow in faith with intentionality. May we recognize Jesus on the road.